Then they carried him forth out of the city, and stoned him with stones, that he died. That's Naboth, the Jezreelite, in the Old Testament. He was killed because King Ahab wanted his vineyard. We're shocked by the brutality of the act. Then we may find ourselves thinking, well, people did do some pretty brutal things in those far-off days.
First thing you know, everybody wanted to be going back and living in caves. Nobody worked anymore. Lived that way for a while.
But when Tessie Hutchinson's friends and neighbors, whom we've come to think of as decent, ordinary people, gather up stones and attack her, we're shocked in a different way. It seems to us neither right nor fair, since, so far as we can tell, she's guilty of no crime. Then again, the manner of her death is so completely out of place in the setting of a modern American small town, where planting and rain, tractors and taxes are the main concerns of life. And most horrifying of all is the matter-of-fact way in which the whole thing is done.
All right, folks, let's finish quickly.
The people's chief feeling seems to be a kind of good-natured impatience. They simply want to finish the affair as quickly as possible so that they can get home to lunch.
Well, everybody, that went pretty fast. Now we're going to have to hurry a little more to get done in time. Bill, you drew for the Hutchinson family.
For these people, apparently, it's just another June 27th.
Grandchildren?
Be a good sport, Tessie. We all took the same chance.
But for us, there are unanswered questions. Why has this particular human being suffered such a terrible fate? What are we to make of it all? What does the author want us to think about and remember once we've got over the first emotional reaction to her story? Tessie herself, of course, has done nothing. She's simply the winner in this year's lottery. And so she's not to be thought of as a criminal, but as a victim, the unfortunate holder of the paper with the black spot. And no matter how much she may engage our sympathy, she's only one victim among many. What happens to her has happened before in this town and is happening at the same time in other towns. Is hers, then, an individual tragedy, the kind you read about in Shakespeare's plays? Or is it part of a communal tragedy? Isn't this a story not about a person, but about a community? The author makes very little attempt to identify individuals in the town. The only two who really stand out are Tessie herself.
Get up there, Bill.
And Old Man Warner.
77th year I've been in the lottery. 77th time.
As for the others, we know some half-dozen names, some relative ages, and a few occupations. They're simply the townspeople. And their town is one of many similar towns which, we're told, all hold lotteries toward the end of June. So, rather than discussing the story in terms of character and motive, let's consider the lottery itself and its purpose in the life of the community.
Jones.
They say over in Warren County they're planning on giving up the lottery.
Pack of crazy fools listening to the young folks. Nothing is good enough for them.
Judd. Clifford.
Used to be a saying, lottery in June, corn heavy soon. Next thing you know, we'd all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns.
Is that the clue we're looking for? Historians and anthropologists have made us familiar with the figure of the sacrificial victim. That is, the individual chosen by a community as a blood offering to the god or gods from whom some particular favor was required. In agricultural societies, of course, the first request would be for a fruitful harvest, and many ancient people were willing to pay so extravagant a price as the offering of a human life. Shirley Jackson's lottery is a ritual sacrifice made by farmers to a god who can only be approached and appeased, so they think, by a blood offering. And when this unspeakable ceremony takes place in our own time and in our own country, its brutality and senselessness become accentuated. The thing just doesn't belong. It's like coming across a witch doctor's mask in a display of the latest surgical equipment. The effect is surrealistic and powerful. Whatever else Shirley Jackson has done in her story, she has certainly given us a memorable image of man's inhumanity to man.
Here, Davy.
It's possible, of course, that all the author had in mind was to plunge us into a nightmare. Vivid, terrifying, unexplainable, like something out of Edgar Allan Poe. But it's also possible that she wants us to use the nightmare image of Tessie's battered corpse as a point of departure, and that her story is a kind of parable of our time. Take, for example, the idea of violence and the way in which it can erupt in the most unexpected ways and places. Violence is something that we in mid-20th century America have unfortunately had to do a great deal of thinking about, and we're still not sure that we understand it, let alone know how to control it. Maybe Shirley Jackson's townspeople are reflections of ourselves, or of some aspect of our communal lives that we don't approve of, and from which we're trying to hide. Ask yourself whether we don't have Tessies in our society now. Scapegoats, victims. Or perhaps the story may really be talking about our Puritan heritage in its more repressive forms, as it may have survived to our own day. Do we still worship a stern and vengeful God who demands outrageous sacrifices and bloody rites? And if we do, should we continue our service to him? Then what about the whole idea of tradition?
There's always been a lottery.
Do we agree with Old Man Warner that the lottery should be continued simply because there's always been one?
It isn't fair! It isn't fair!
Or do we object with Tessie that the whole thing just isn't fair, isn't right? It's always easier to follow an established trail, to do what someone else has done before. But when that trail leads to the wrong destination, when what has been done before no longer makes any sense, should we stick to it without turning? It seems to me that Shirley Jackson asks us to think both about the terrible and useless death of one human being, and also about the reliance we place on tradition, on acting in a certain way only because it's always been the way to act.
There's always been a lottery.